What's up guys and welcome back to today's video. Today we are going to talk about something that has been very highly requested. We are going to compare the GME short squeeze with the 2008 Volkswagen short squeeze. And while it could seem boring to listen to some old comparison of something that happened 13 years ago, I truly believe that this is the most exciting video so far. And I'm 100% sure you will find this very interesting as well. Because by looking at the Volkswagen squeeze, we can get a much better picture of what we can expect from GME. And what you will find is something absolutely unbelievable. So make sure to stick around all the way to the end of the video where you will see for yourself the thrilling price prediction that I have prepared. Most people understand what a short squeeze is and that the GME short squeeze would create big profits for us individuals, the small guys, at the expense of short selling institutions. And most people think that this is great, and I do too. But I think it's very hard to get any sense of how high exactly the share price may be sent. And at the same time, it's very hard to comprehend the psychology behind a short squeeze. And this is absolutely understandable because all of it is very complicated, especially with this GME short squeeze. So to begin with, I need to go over what actually happened in 2008 with the Volkswagen short squeeze. And I promise you that I will not bore you with any long or complicated explanations. So here's what happened in simple terms. Porsche owned 30% of Volkswagen, a government fund called Lower Saxony owned 20% of Volkswagen, and another 5% was owned by index funds. None of these holders were planning to sell the stock for a long time. That means that 55% of the stocks were locked and 45% of stocks were in public float. At this time, the short interest was around 13%. That means that 13% of shares had been sold short and needed to be bought back at some point. Now, at this time, short sellers are fine. They have plenty of stocks to buy back from. 45% of stocks are available to be bought by the short sellers, and only 13% of total stocks are shorted. But then, one day, something very humorous happened, something that will result in the historical Volkswagen short squeeze, the mother of all short squeezes. Porsche, without warning, suddenly announced that they had accumulated another 44% of total stocks. This meant that to the 55% of locked stocks, another 44% was added. 99% of stocks were suddenly impossible to buy. Now the short interest of 13% was 13 times higher than the 1% of stocks left to buy. So the demand for that 1% was now sky high, and the short sellers realized this, but so did many of the holders of that 1%. Short sellers were now forced to buy the stock at whatever price the holders of that 1% chose to sell at, and the short sellers knew this. When the markets opened, short sellers rushed to buy the stock when it was still cheap. Some stockholders still sold the stock for a small price because they didn't realize what unique power they had just obtained. But when all of the cheap stock was quickly bought up, the stock was rapidly sold for a higher and higher price as hours passed. This brings a simple question. Why didn't short sellers just wait a few days until the price would go back to normal? The answer is also quite simple. The more the price rises, the more short sellers lose. And when they have lost a large amount of money, the brokers will eventually invoke margin calls, forcing the short seller to immediately buy the stock at whatever price it is currently at, because the short seller no longer has the resources to buy the stock back if it were to go slightly higher. The broker has the ability to do this to ensure that the short seller will afford buying the stock to give it back to the broker. And if the short sellers see that the price is rapidly increasing and starting to come close to the level where they will be forced to buy the stock, they might as well buy the stock earlier when it is cheaper. When they do buy the stock earlier, demand increases and the price increase accelerates. When the price keeps on increasing, the next short seller also comes closer to the level where they will be forced to buy the stock. And the same thing happens again and again until even the short sellers with huge margins could be forced to buy. It's a vicious circle. And because short sellers know from the very start that a vicious circle is about to push the price up, they themselves ensure that the vicious circle does take place as they hurry to buy the stock when the market opens. Some short sellers will try to buy as soon as possible to cut their losses. Other short sellers will wait and hope until the very end where they are finally forced to buy the stock anyways, but for a larger price as the broker invokes the margin call. Either way, they both buy at some point and they both help with pushing the price up. In the Volkswagen short squeeze, all 13% of stocks shorted were not covered. Some of the short sellers had enormous margins, large enough to not be forced to buy. They took a risk with waiting, but as it showed out, they had enough resources to survive the storm, but most of the shorters did not. Now, let's look at what's happening in GME right now. At this moment, around 30% of stocks are held by insiders and are locked up. An estimate of around 150% of all GME stocks have been shorted. This gives us a ratio of 70% of stock available for shorters to buy versus 150% of stocks that need to be bought at some point by the shorters. If you remember, the Volkswagen squeeze started with the ratio being 13-1 in demand versus available stock. In GME, it seems the ratio is 2-1. This brings us to the first difference between the Volkswagen squeeze and the GME squeeze. In the Volkswagen squeeze, the ratio was suddenly terrifying for short sellers with 13-1. In GME, the ratio of 2-1 is worrying but not at all as bad. At first glance, this will seem that to many people that the GME squeeze is overhyped and weak. But this is in fact the very thing that is so powerful with the GME squeeze, and here's why. Just because 70% of the stock is in the hands of the public, it does not mean this stock is easily bought, even if that is usually the case. The reason being simple, a lot of the holders of GME are dedicated long-term investors that won't sell no matter what, not even after the squeeze. In addition to this, even more of the 70% of public holders are part of the hype and expect the short squeeze to come and are dedicated and united in not selling until the short sellers are squeezed. The dangers the short sellers are facing are not written in black and white like in 2008. This time it is impossible to know how many shares will actually be possible for the short sellers to buy. The difference between the Volkswagen squeeze and the GME squeeze is that the GME squeeze is not accidental. So many holders are united in manipulating the market into rising until the vicious circle that I talked about takes place and crushes the short sellers. So the real number of easily bought stocks is not 70%. The real number is impossible to know, but if we look at the hype right now, I think that the number is about to go much, much lower than 70%. If we say that the number manages to go down to 10% as an example, which I believe is reasonable, we suddenly got a ratio of 15-1 in demand versus available stock. This is even better than the Volkswagen squeeze, and the short sellers don't expect a thing. While they are underestimating the hype and the holders' strength, they are currently taking even bigger short positions, loading our rocket with even more fuel. In addition to this, even more weak holders will be replaced as soon as the market opens on Tuesday. They will sell because they are afraid and will be replaced with the people that have sat all weekend scrolling through hype, ready to stand strong, united against the short sellers. That's why I previously said in another video that we might see a last pullback before we take off. But that's completely fine because it only lets us prepare to fly even higher. I strongly believe that the ratio that I have been talking about all video is looking very good. No one knows if the short sellers will be more desperate in this squeeze or back in 2008. GME's ratio is more than 2-1, that's for sure, but it could get as high as 30-1, maybe even more than that, no one knows. This would mean that we could see an even bigger explosion than the 1000% increase that was seen in Volkswagen. The question that still remains though is where exactly we should sell and take our profits if we see the short squeeze. It's a difficult question that is super important. Therefore, I will make another video only talking about how to best take your profits. So make sure you are subscribed to not miss out on that. In the next video, I will also talk about what could potentially go wrong for the public investors when jumping on this trade, and I will cover the mistakes that are likely to be made by a lot of people. Also, I would like to bring out once again that even though things are looking very good from my perspective, you need to do your own analysis. I am not giving financial advice, I am only sharing my own opinion, what I believe could be seen in the future. I would also like to warn everyone not to invest what you cannot afford to lose. A lot of people will tell you that this is a safe bet. It is absolutely not a safe bet. With high reward exists also high risk, however bullish everything may seem. I say this because I don't want any of my subscribers to be misinformed. You need to know what you are getting yourself into here. But with all of that being said, thanks a lot for watching and supporting the channel. If you liked the video, make sure to leave a thumbs up and leave a comment if you have any questions at all. See you in the next video and take care.